Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 307 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Strength from Sweden, an interview with Åsa Rydmark Kersley. My name is Rachel Barnes.
And I'm Matt Sabatello. I'm so excited to be co-hosting this interview with my good friend and former podcast guest, Rachel Barnes. Rachel is a life, health, and wellness coach who specializes in Lyme disease. Rachel, can you start by introducing Åsa and give us a little bit of background before we start the podcast interview?
It was such a pleasure to speak with Åsa today. She is truly an incredible woman and an inspiration to us all. Her journey is inspiring. She went from, having no resources and awful symptoms to fighting her way through the healthcare system in Sweden and, as she says, clawing her way back to health. And she's now so much more vibrant and has so much life and is inspired to help others. So we're so excited to have Åsa here on the show today. Hi, Åsa. Welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast. We are so excited to have you here today and to hear your story and for you to help so many people in this community. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I think to get started, we'd like some background info. Just tell us about where you grew up, where you're from, and kind of what your childhood was like.
I'm now 47. And I live in Sweden. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s in a small town in Sweden called Linköping. My parents divorced when I was 4, so I grew up with my mother, and she had another child. So I had a half sister who's about 5 years younger than me. So there was the 3 of us in the family. I used to see my dad every second weekend. We grew up in a working class family, in a millennial kind of complex where it was no traffic. It was kind of a safe area. All the cars were parked on the outside of the whole kind of area, so it was a safe-ish enough environment to grow up in. We didn't have a huge amount of money, but we didn't really have lack either. It was an all right childhood.
That sounds lovely, like a small, quaint, safe community, and the lack of traffic. I'm a little jealous, I'm going to say. So would you say you grew up in a place that you just had a normal childhood? Do you remember being sick ever?
No, I was a fairly healthy child, I think. I had a flu a couple of times, but that was about it. And I've always viewed myself as a healthy person most of my life. I've never really been one of these people that, I remember the flu was going around and it was me and one other person in school and everyone else was homesick. So I've always considered myself healthy and quite a strong person.
We can tell that already. So, and tell us a little bit about what you do and what you do career-wise.
What I do now I work as a research coordinator. I'm a nurse, but if you go far back, I started. So I after school, after what you'd probably call college in America, I moved straight to England, and I meant to stay there for maybe a couple of months and then travel to Australia and then go home and do my go back to university and become something. But I ended up staying in London for 12 years. So so I worked in London. I worked in bars. At first I worked in the Camden Market, and then I started working in bars and restaurants and making my own little niche of life. And I used to party quite hard, and I didn't live a very healthy life, but I had fun.
Great. So what do you think, what were your dreams and goals that you remember growing up from when you were a child to now, and just anything that you really desired and wanted to come in your life?
That's a difficult one, because I've never really, I come from a family where you don't really plan ahead, or My dad's family is a farming family, and my mum's side is more of a work hand. They didn't have their own farm, so we didn't really have goals. I mean, I think, the first person from my family to go to university, maybe the second. One of my cousins went, or a couple of my cousins actually went before me, but on my mum's side, I think I was the first. So we didn't really plan for the future. It was more kind of, let's see what happens. Yeah, and there weren't really any expectations for me to do anything specific with my life. And really, when I was in my 20s and I was partying really hard, I never really saw myself as living really past 27. I had that kind of nihilistic thing of being in the 27 club.
Yeah, understand that feeling. So when you were being a party girl, do you think, is that when your symptoms started to develop? So tell us a little bit more about when you started to feel symptoms of Lyme disease and how that sort of progressed in your life.
The Lyme disease didn't come till much later, but so I was in my 40s probably when I started having symptoms, probably late 30s anyway. But I think my first experience, that now looking back at, that I can connect to Lyme disease, was when I was 14. I had rings. I had ring marks on my leg, and I obviously never reflected on Lyme. I'd never even heard of ticks when I was that age. So I didn't really reflect on it. I went to the school nurse and she gave me some hydrocortisone to put on it. And after a few weeks, it went away. So I didn't really think about it. But as I grew older, I would always have an itch on my leg. And if I got stressed, and it would break out in little blotches and things. But I never really reflected over this either back then. But that was probably the first encounter I had with Lyme, unless I got it from my parents, which I don't know. But we've always had a fast metabolism, as you call it, so which you've always viewed as really good, but now in hindsight, I kind of connect it to beings like the body being under stress, so it needs more energy. But I didn't, obviously having quite a strong immune system previously and from my parents and everything, I think that it wasn't really a big thing in my life. But 2 years after I had the rings on my leg, I was at a party with some friends and somebody threw me a ball. I turned around quickly and my kneecap dislocated. And that was the same knee and again, thinking of what I know now, I can connect that to the Lyme disease, which probably was in my knee, and the collagen being weakened by whatever microbe was attacking my tissues. But obviously I didn't think about that then, and nobody knew about it, and nobody talked about ticks back then. So
yeah, that seems like such a common theme. It's you look back now and you're like, oh my gosh, there are all these moments in your life where you're like, that could have been Lyme, that could have been Lyme, right?
Yeah.
And you second guess yourself. So how did it progress from there with your symptoms? Because I know you had some pretty intense symptoms.
Yeah. So I mean, I lived with this knee pain for most of my life. When I lived in London, I used to worked as a waitress. I always had knee problems, and we had the kitchen was downstairs. I was running up and downstairs all day, and then I would go to emergency room because you'd get a doctor properly. So I would turn up at the emergency room with my bad knee. They would just laugh at me. And go like, oh, maybe you've got rheumatoid arthritis. And I was like, well, I'm in my 20s. Why would I have that? And I was really confused by all this. But it wasn't ever bad enough for me to not live with it. And it didn't kind of restrict me in my life too much. So yeah, I didn't really reflect as I was healthy, but when I lived in London, I had episodes of not really liking myself very much, and living with I was compromised in a lot of places where I didn't respect my body enough, and I didn't say no to men, and because I didn't really think that I had a place in life to actually even say no. And that's really so sad now in hindsight as well, that it was only about a year ago that I realized that what was happening to me back then was not okay. And it was always, even through the Me Too campaign, I was still maintaining that what happened to me was totally my fault. It was, I mean, I was never compromised. But then when I look at it now, and I've got children my age, then I realized, oh God, if that happened to my kids, I would be outraged. And so I think all of these experiences in my life led me to then being in the place where I was when I contracted Lyme the second time. Or I got bitten by a tick in 2013, and then it must have only been months later, I got pregnant with my third child, and that experience was so different to my first two, who were so my oldest was about 8 when I got pregnant with my third, and 6. So I had children who were 8 and 6, and the pregnancies with them were a fart in space compared to this pregnancy which I had, which was horrible. I was so ill. I was really, and also I was working nights as a nurse, which didn't help, of course, but I was contributing all these symptoms to, like, oh, I'm so much older now, and I'm really stressed, and oh, I've got so much on my plate, and so, and also I went to my midwife, and the midwife saying, oh, you feel sick, so just eat anything you can, whatever you can put in your body is good energy. So I was eating mainly sugar and flour, which obviously didn't help. I mean, yeah. I remember going like, oh, the only thing I can eat is those sour sweets, so that's what I'd be eating. Because that's what the midwife told me, that any energy is good energy. And you kind of go, oh, if I'd known then what I knew now, I obviously wouldn't have eaten that. But luckily I had my third baby, and she was absolutely perfect. She was a bit blue in the face when she came out, but because it was a very quick labor. But for some unknown reason, I was never scared through my labors that would be anything wrong with my children. I just trusted in the process. Which was a gift, because I don't know, that obviously that isn't always the case. But she's perfect, and we got through it. But even after she was born, I started getting these neurological things where I've always been a little bit forgetful, but I've been pretty switched on. And working as a nurse, you have to be able to hold lots of things in your head and whatever. And I started feeling that I wasn't on top of things. It was a running joke that I would always leave stuff at friends' houses. We had this mummy group where we would meet once a week, and without fail, every week I would leave something at everybody's houses. And I would turn up a week late to the nurse's office with my baby, and I would turn up a week early to these whatever appointment it was. I was out of schedule. And it was all these small things, and I was also at the time really beating myself up a bit about this. I was going like, oh, you should be this and you should be that, and you come on, also you should be able to pull yourself together, and everybody else can do it, why can't you? So that was obviously adding more stress to myself. So, but then I and also during that time, my partner and I, who'd been together for quite a long time, decided to get married. So for the whole of my parental leave, which is really generous in Sweden, we get almost a year and a half off of work.
Wow.
With babies, so it was really kind of, it should have been a really nice calm time, but obviously I then decided to spend it planning for a wedding, which probably wasn't in hindsight the best way, but never mind, that's what we did and that's what we decided to do. And but and also I'm backtracking a bit, we have this amazing house, which is great, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but it's also a big a responsibility. Like we were constantly renovating and doing all these things, which also was a huge amount of stress, and then working nights and all those kind of things, which just making me incredibly tired. So I started noticing that I was falling asleep at night when I was reading stories to my kids, and I wasn't on top of things. And so I started looking around. I was like, something's got to give here. So I started looking into my consumption of sugar, and I was thinking, oh, it's got to be this. I have always loved sweets, and I've always been, but my whole family has always had a massive sweet tooth, and that's how we've celebrated things, and we've commiserated with sweets and whatever. So I was thinking, oh yeah, it's probably this. So I'll cut out sugar. And I went on a course. I saw a newspaper article from my town in the local newspaper of a woman who's describing pretty much my symptoms, or this fatigue and all these things. And she kind of pinned it down to her sugar consumption and sugar addiction. So I went on her course and I got the diagnosis that I'm a sugar addict. And I think I probably am, but I think in hindsight, again, I think that might have set me back as well, because in a way that kind of explained to me, like, oh, I'm a sugar addict, which means I'm a bit flawed, so I can't do anything about this. And it made me a bit of a victim in my own eyes. I don't think that's what they were teaching, but that's how I explained it to myself, and I gave myself a bit of a pass to continue eating sugar.
Also, I just want to jump in real quick here, because so many people I know personally, right? We can call them sugar addicts, and they live, I mean, I don't want to say healthy, but they live functional lives without symptoms. So when I hear you say that you were diagnosed as a sugar addict, as the sole contributing factor to your symptoms, I'm kind of scratching my head, because I'm thinking, I know so many people that would fit into that category, but aren't sick like you were, right? So did you ever have that sort of like discrepancy of, well, why do so many other people, my entire family is a sugar addict, as you said earlier, right? Why wasn't the rest of your family suffering the way you were, and why were you different? Did that thought ever cross your mind?
It did eventually. I think the first time I did this course, I had a really big, it actually changed my life a lot, because cutting out sugar made me feel a lot better. It really did. And but I also didn't really want to subscribe to the whole sugar addict thing, because I thought I'll just try this for 3 months and see how it goes, and then so I did it just before, like 3 months before Christmas, and then I made it through Christmas, and I thought, yes, I'm so good. And then on New Year's Day, I was like, oh, let's have some sugar. And then I felt awful. So obviously the sugar, it wasn't good for me, but at the same time, yeah, like you're saying, it obviously affected me a lot worse than a lot of other people.
And thinking about this also, I mean, you know, I know from our offline discussion, you've traveled a lot, right? So you went to South Africa, Australia, Thailand, you were in London, you were all over the world. So do you ever think that possibly you contracted some sort of foreign illness while you were overseas that wasn't as well known in London, right? Because just in hearing your story, I'm wondering, you know, you could have picked up a strain of Lyme disease now that we know, right? You could have picked up a strain of any kind of infection or viral, you know, virus overseas. So did you ever look at that, or big picture approach your travel as maybe being a contributing factor to your health as well?
Yeah, not back then, but obviously now I have. Yeah, definitely. But back then I just didn't have a clue about all these things. So
And
it didn't cross my mind.
when you mentioned earlier, as you said, you sort of you were a partier, right? You were out partying, you were sort of, I'll call it like almost self-medicating. You weren't feeling well, so you were doing anything to feel better. So
Yeah.
you weren't respecting your body. And this is very common when people are very sick and they're trying to find ways to feel better and they can't explain their symptoms. But I want to understand better how that impacted your relationship, because you had 3 children with your partner and now husband. Now, how is that impacting your relationship, right? Because when you're a partier and you're avoiding your symptoms, we know that can cause a lot of relationship strains. And a lot of people listen to this podcast often want to know how the heck do you maintain a relationship through Lyme disease? And how do you, never mind, start a new relationship, but get through one while you're sick? So can you share with us some of the struggles you had, and looking back, how you were able to overcome those struggles to continue, to have 3 healthy children and to have a healthy relationship with your partner at the time?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I didn't really. The partying part of me, or that part of my life, was before I met my now husband. But back then I did have a very unhealthy relationship with somebody that was very on off, and it was all about us both not respecting our bodies and our lives. And so yeah, it's difficult to answer that question, but in becoming sick when I was, after having my 3rd child, I did, part of my healing was actually leaving my husband, and we have quite a strange relationship where we've split up, but we still live in the same house because we have such a big house that we have an apartment each, but and we also still help each other out. But I think a big part of it was actually me standing up for myself and learning how to love myself, because I think that for as long as you don't love and respect yourself, then you're never going to heal, and you're never going to do the things for yourself that you need to do to get well. And I think that's my biggest learning from this whole experience, is that I wasn't respecting myself, and that's why I got ill, because I was just saying yes to everything, and anyone who asked me anything, I would just go, yeah, whatever, yeah, I'll do it. Because and just learning to say no and learning to respect myself has been the biggest learning. The biggest learning I've got, or the biggest
It was pivotal. It was an important lesson to learn, to be able to heal. And I think I couldn't agree more in my own personal experience, and I think Rachel probably as well. But I do want to focus on one other piece that you mentioned earlier, was when you were 14, you had this rash, which is likely a bullseye rash, and you think you were probably infected with Lyme disease when you were 14. Maybe it was dormant, maybe it came, on and off throughout your childhood until you were 39. Do you think you were reinfected at 39 with your 3rd child, or do you think that your body was just compromised and you were stressed and the dormant Lyme disease came out and made you really sick? What are your thoughts on possible reinfections versus being infected when you were a child and having it just, wreak havoc and coming back out to make you sicker later in life?
I think a bit of both, probably in my case, but mainly I think I was reinfected when I had the tick bite in 2013, because I remember it was on my leg, but higher up. So, and it did get infected. I never got a bullseye rash because obviously I'd already had that when I was 14, and I think I obviously had some kind of immunity that took care of the Lyme disease, but I probably got a co-infection, and I haven't had any labs on this, so I don't know what infections I've got, but I did have a reaction, and I phoned my GP, and I spoke to a nurse at the GP's office, and they basically said, do you have a bullseye? And I said no. And they said, oh, well, don't worry about it then. And
But also we know there's more than just, you mentioned that maybe you had an immunity the second time around for Lyme, but Borrelia, there's so many different species and categories, right? So one of the things we've been learning a lot on this podcast recently is people harbor various types of Lyme disease, Borrelia burgdorferi, Borrelia miyamotoi, and there's many others. But it seems to be from some research we've heard from Dr. Alan McDonald on our podcast recently, is that if you have Borrelia miyamotoi and Borrelia burgdorferi together, that's a really bad combination. It makes you even sicker, right? So that second tick bite could have infected you with another strain and co-infections and put you over the edge, leading up to your third pregnancy, causing your crash, right? But I do want to just hit the stage, and then I know Rachel's going to pick back up with some questions here, that you were 39 years old and you got sick with your third child. And now you have your third child. Thank God everything is okay, right? She comes out a little blue, but everything is good. Now you're diagnosed with basically you're sugar crazy, and you eliminated sugar and you're feeling better and things are good. And you think maybe that was it and you're healed. But in hindsight, I'm sure there was more to the picture, obviously, right? So this is where if you can pick up there, and then Rachel's going to continue with you from this point.
Yeah. So I did have this relationship with sugar for a long time, where I would not eat any for a while, and then I would relapse and have lots of it, and I would have these crashes, and then I would feel really, really bad. And also at the time, I was like a born again Christian with the whole kind of sugar thing, where I was going like, oh, sugar is really, really bad for everyone. So I was really hard on my family as well. I was going, nobody should eat sugar, and I was fighting everyone, and I was fighting my own body, and I was fighting myself, and then obviously when I couldn't resist it, I would have these crashes, and I would really have a lot of self-loathing. And then, but also at the time, because I was working as a research nurse, I knew how to research things. And I also started on the side doing a research project and studying for a master's, so that I could do my own research. And part of that course was looking into or deciding on whatever you wanted to look in yourself. So I started researching low carbohydrate diets and things like that. And I found all the things to match up with my symptoms, and I was trying to kind of carve out a path for myself to get healthy through my own studies. But also it was a very stressful time. And then my husband got a job where he had to work in Stockholm, so he was away a lot, and we were also obviously renovating the house and planning for the wedding and all that. Or this was after the wedding, but we were still under a lot of stress. And then so I went on a second course for sugar addicts, which was actually run online from America. And during that time, I started having more symptoms, because I was under control with the sugar back then, but I was still binge eating on things like nuts and seed bread and things like that, which was not helping me, basically. And during the second course, in October 2019, my right arm overnight, it felt like it was overnight, but it swelled up, and it was really, really big and stiff. So I was like, my God, what's going on here? So I went to my GP, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. They took all these labs, and even back then, the first person I saw, the first doctor I saw, I said, this is something to do with my gut, because I'm eating all these things, and when I eat, I can feel the symptoms. So when I would eat wheat, for example, I would feel like I was drunk, and I had all these symptoms, but I couldn't really control them. And I kind of half knew what I needed to do, but I just couldn't get myself to do them. And then I was also then explaining this as being a sugar addict, and kind of allowing me to do them as well, which is counterintuitive, but I felt like I was really out of control.
Also, I wanted to, sorry to interrupt, I wanted to jump back to something you said. Pull a Matt, he loves to jump back and dive in deeper to things, but it was such a beautiful realization that you said about being like a victim, like you were victimizing yourself kind of all throughout your life leading up to And it's almost setting the blueprint to chronic illness. I think that's something that's so critical for a lot of people, is it's, you're kind of setting up your life. Not that it's your fault, to be clear, it's not your fault that you were chronically ill, but it seems like such a common thing with people that there's a pattern of chronic stress. There's, you're just putting your all into things, even though you don't feel well. You have all these projects and just, the I must have done this to myself kind of thing is just such a common, but I'm also wondering, was that something that contributed to it taking so long for you to get a diagnosis, because you were doubting yourself and victimizing yourself? And
Yes.
did that, hinder you getting a diagnosis?
Yes, totally. Because I feel, especially from my family, we've had this underdog kind of attitude all our lives. There's no point in asking for help because we won't get it. That kind of attitude, which I've lived with for a long time, and I've never really experienced having a voice or expected anyone to really listen to me, and that's been I think my main obstacle to get past, to actually get help. And also this self-reliance. Yeah, I've always been thinking like, nobody's going to help me, it's just me against the world. And that's where I've been living for a long time. And it's only in the last couple of maybe 2 to 3 years that I've realized that actually it's okay to ask for help. And that is a massive obstacle to get past. And it's made a big difference. And I'm still struggling with it because it's difficult, but it's, And also what I've realized from listening to all these podcasts as well is that it seems as though the people who have somebody else who can advocate for them are the ones who can do better quicker. So I think I listened to somebody where they said, oh, my mother did all the research and she looked into all these things for me. And that when I listened to that, I was like, oh, wouldn't that be nice if somebody else fought my corner? Because when I was feeling at my worst, I just didn't. I mean, I got Richard Horowitz's book, and it's a massive book and it's really complicated with lots of medical language. And I'm a nurse, I can understand most of it, but it was with my brain not working. I was just reading it and not retaining anything. And it was really hard. And I remember asking my husband at the time, will you please read this for me and explain it to me, because I don't understand it. And he was just, we were in so much fighting, and he wasn't in a space where he could actually help me, which was really sad, because I'd blamed him for so much for so long that he wasn't kind of in a space where he wanted to even help me. So yeah.
Also, I have to interrupt again, because in the back of my mind, when you said you were doing house renovations, an immediate red flag went up in my mind, right? So all along, you're doing house renovations, and this is a slow process, and you're getting sicker and sicker. You're doing the sugar detox that helps, and it sounds like you have some ups and downs of the sugar detoxes, right? So were you seeing any of the doctors where you just or in your head, was it just, it's sugar is the cause, and when I relapse with sugar and I eat sugar, I feel like crap, and then I do better and I feel good, and then I relapse and I eat a ton of sugar and I feel like crap, and then I do better and I feel good? Was that your mindset, that it was all sugar, or were you seeing other doctors as well throughout this time period?
No, I never saw a doctor. Not until my arm swelled up in October 2019.
And when your arm swelled up in 2019 and you went to the doctor, it sounds like this didn't get better, it just continued to get worse, your arm, right? So
yeah.
Did you see other doctors? What types of specialists and doctors did you see because of your arm? Or was it just the one and you sort of got frustrated and gave up after not getting relief?
No, well, the healthcare system in Sweden is quite different to America. So here we have more or less free healthcare. You pay a small amount, but you basically just have your doctor, and you're told you can't really choose. You can choose, but it's very limited choice. So I went to my GPs, and when you're fairly young and you're fairly healthy, then you always get to see an unqualified doctor the first time you come. So so I had this young woman, and obviously she looked at me, and I said I'm a nurse, and she got all nervous because oh my God. Here I am, newly, or I'm not even a qualified doctor. Anyway, she diagnosed my arm with probably a trapped nerve in the neck, and she sent me. She wanted to send me for a scan, and I was kind of doubting this. I was going, this has got nothing to do with my neck. This is, I think it's connected to my guts. And I told her so, and she was like, well, let's go with my story first. And then she got sick herself, so I never heard back from her. So after a while, I kind of went, oh, they're not getting back to me. So I contacted them again, and I got to see another unqualified doctor. I think this one was actually qualified, but she was very new. And she ran loads of tests, and everything came back negative. It was all, all your labs are great, you look great. And I was like, yeah, I everything looks great, but I don't look great. Or at least I don't feel great.
But also, how did they reconcile that? Because I went through that as well, and because I was so cognitively impaired, I didn't challenge my doctors enough, and that's something that I think a lot of us don't do. But when you, in your case, you had this swollen arm, it was very visible. It wasn't something that they could say is due to stress, right? Oh, you're having anxiety because you're stressed out. Oh, it's not something they can easily write off to a psychological symptom, like many people in the Lyme community. So when you're having these visible physical symptoms and all your tests are coming back normal, what were your doctors offering you as a solution? Were they saying we need to refer you out to another specialist? Were they saying just give it time and it's going to go away? Because there's this clear discrepancy of your lab work and your presentation of symptoms, right? So what was the response you got at that point?
Well, they were basically just scratching their heads. They sent me for all of these scans, mainly looking for cancer, of course, because it's the right arm. They thought there was maybe something like a breast cancer with a lymph problem. But my breast scan was clear, and all the other things they did it was all clear. So in the end, around Christmas, she asked to refer me to somebody else, and then obviously Corona happened. So the pandemic kind of shut everything down, and then I was just waiting, and I was because I'm a healthcare professional myself, and then I was, well, it's not that bad. I won't bother them. They're probably busy right now. And I was, I was just waiting for them to get back to me. And all the while I was getting more symptoms. I was losing feeling in my toes and fingers, and the brain fog was getting much worse. But I was kind of, I could still work, and I could still do all the things that I needed to do in life, more or less, but I was struggling. But I didn't really, my only, as my doctors and what you just said as well, my only objective symptom was the arm swelling. But
sorry to interrupt again. Can you just give us, because you mentioned you started to get new symptoms at this point, right? Corona hits, you're getting more symptoms, you're getting worse. Obviously swollen arm. You had pain in your neck. You mentioned that you had in your toes and fingers, they would go numb and tingle as well. What other symptoms did you have, both psychological and physical? Did you have anxiety? Were you having depression symptoms? Were you having any kind of weird neurological symptoms or physical symptoms that you didn't discuss yet, just to get the broad picture of how sick you were at this time and how your symptoms were developing?
No, I think my main problem was I was really, really, really tired all the time. And also just losing, I was so cold. So the winters are really cold here, but as soon as I went outside, I would lose feeling in my hands and my feet, and they would go totally white, especially my feet. So I would always have these heated soles in my shoes to go to the stables with my kids and stuff. And we went on holiday to Israel in February 2020, just before the world shut down. And it was the most miserable holiday I've ever been on, because my family was just like, why can't you come with us? No, I haven't got the energy. And I would be walking around these markets, just dragging my feet along and trying to be cheerful with my family. And I just couldn't. And I was just going, what is wrong with me? But I think I was just so inflamed, like generally inflamed in my body, that I just couldn't cope. But I just didn't know back then what it was. So when I got back from there, I decided to call my doctors again and just ask what's happening. And they said they would get back to me, and they didn't. And then my face swelled up. I put a new face cream on my face, and then morning after, my face was just swollen like a big balloon. And so I went back to my doctors, and I got to see another unqualified doctor, a different one this time. And she didn't think that the swelling in my face had anything to do with all the other symptoms that I was presenting with, but she said she just gave me some antihistamines and sent me on my way. But when I was there, I said, look, nobody's got back to me about my other symptoms. Can you please ask them to? And she was, yes, of course I will do that. And then I heard nothing for ages. So by this time, I got really fed up with the Swedish healthcare system, and I started looking around for other things. So I got in touch with a functional medicine doctor up in Stockholm, and I was listening to a lot of podcasts, like the Diet Doctor podcast and all these things, which were all talking about functional medicine, and I was researching and looking into it. And also I got in touch with what's his name, Hyman. Mark Hyman. I was reading his book as well, and there was all these tests that you could take and all these different things that could be wrong with you. So I signed up with that, but they had a massive queue, so I didn't get an appointment until June. So I was waiting for this appointment, and obviously it was very expensive. And for me to spend 30,000 Swedish krona, which is about 3,000 pounds, I don't know how many dollars that is, but was a massive thing. But then I was thinking, God, it's Corona, we can't go anywhere anyway, so I might as well spend my holiday money on trying to get better. And also then, while I was waiting for this appointment, I did contact my doctor again, and finally I got to see my house doctor, which I'd never in my life met before, because I'd always been very healthy. And this was a doctor who was fairly close to retirement, and when she saw my symptoms and the fact that nobody had got back to me, and that my arm was so swollen, she panicked. She went, oh my God, how have we missed this? And she was probably a bit scared of being sued. I don't know. So she sent me for another round of cancer scare. But we have this unit called SQ in Sweden, which is the something like Unified Cancer Investigation Clinic or something like that, where they get all the different specialities in, and they look at the case as slightly from a bigger picture. So then I finally got to see somebody, and they, again, a newly qualified doctor, but still they spent an hour with me, and I got to talk and tell them all about all my symptoms and my own, because I was researching things like oxalate at the time, and I was thinking maybe that had something to do with it, and I was telling them all these ideas that I had of what it could be, and they were like, oh well, that's great, but we're going to do our thing first and then we'll see. So then they'd sent me through the whole kind of spiral again with all the MR and the CT, and this time they found something on my liver, which they then looked back at, but then realized it was nothing to operate on. In hindsight, I think it's probably parasitic, but nobody knows anything about that here, so they just let it go.
Åsa, how did you feel? Like, you're a healthcare professional. How did you feel going from doctor to doctor to doctor? And because it's just so similar to so many of our journeys, that they didn't put any of these puzzle pieces together. They're looking at one thing at a time. And you're in the healthcare field. I mean,
I know. I feel really saddened, and I felt this the whole time I've worked as a nurse as well. I feel really saddened about how we have specialized our bodies and cut it up in so many different pieces that nobody sees the whole thing anymore, and that really saddens me. And that's why I still couldn't. I stopped working as a nurse, because I couldn't really. I didn't want to be part of that system anymore. I spent so much of my time working as a nurse, fighting with other wards about whose patient we had in front of us. because, oh no, this patient doesn't belong to gynae because she's got something on her leg, or so. And that's like, nobody sees the big picture anymore. And I also during the time I was doing my my master's, and in the nursing course, they're all thinking about this. They're going, oh, we've got to unify, we've got to do this, and we've got to see the whole person. We've got to let the patient be part of it, and be a co-creator of the care that we give. And it's all very nice, but we're not doing it. But I'm hoping, because it's in the course, that we're getting there at some point in the future. We're going to get there, but it's not happening at the moment. So it was frustrating, and also I felt that nobody was listening to me. Every time, every new doctor I would meet, I would say, this is something to do with my gut. I know that it starts in my gut, because when I eat something, it affects me. I can physically feel it pretty much straight away after I've eaten it. I can feel the reaction in my body, and nobody would listen to me. And I felt I was just banging my head against the wall the whole time.
And your intuition was right the whole time. It's like your intuition was spot on, and none of these doctors could see it. And to Matt's point, I think it's like, with the Lyme community, we all have to be such advocates for ourselves when we are so sick, and it's infuriating, but I just relate so much to what you're saying. I'm sure Matt does as well.
Yeah, I do. And also, one of the things that's just jumping out at me is, we learned recently that Yale University did a study, and 20%, just under 19 point something percent of acute Lyme disease patients had liver dysfunction. And then now they're starting to study the livers of chronic Lyme patients, and they're realizing their livers are completely shot, right? Which we kind of knew, we know now as chronic Lyme patients, because we know detoxing and liver, and we start to learn these types of things, but they're proving this at universities and at the academic level. So when you presented with liver issues, I mean, they have done studies. So Dr. McDonald, who we interviewed on this podcast, partnered with Yale University, they autopsied many chronic Lyme livers. And all of them, whether it was inflammation or whether it was a nodule, whatever it was in the liver that sparked some sort of curiosity, if they did a biopsy of it, every single one of those biopsies had Lyme spirochetes in the liver. And that was contributing to the liver issues, right? And then they would find parasites as well. They would find biofilm. They would find all these other things in the liver biopsy. So I'm hearing this, all of your symptoms are consistent with tick-borne illness and Lyme disease, and yet we have studies that show the liver connection to Lyme. Nobody's thinking this, and they're just saying, oh, the liver seems to be off. Oh, but you know what? It's okay. Just keep going on. You're really sick, but it's all right. Right? I mean, I feel like they missed the boat so many times with your symptoms at so many stages of your progression of Lyme disease. And it's really frustrating to hear that, because there are studies, there are people out there doing brilliant work to help the community, but the information is not being properly disseminated throughout the world to have doctors be better informed to make the connection between Lyme, tick-borne illness, and a lot of these little nuanced things like liver dysfunction, right? So, I mean, I just wanted to throw that out there, because again, I'm hearing these things and we're hearing it build up, and it's like, I'm thinking Lyme disease. I know Rachel's thinking Lyme disease, and now you obviously know Lyme disease, right? But it took you far too long to get properly diagnosed. So I apologize, and I digress from my little rant, but it's just frustrating hearing this, and I feel very sorry that you had to suffer for so long before getting a diagnosis.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the thing is, I can't feel any animosity against these people, because they don't know any better, and I didn't know any better back then. I just didn't know. And if I'd known, I obviously would have spoken up, but I didn't. And I'm a healthcare professional, and I've got to feel a little bit defensive as well, because I think everyone's trying their hardest to help me. They were trying the hardest to help me. It's frustrating, of course, but we can't know things we don't know. So that's why we need to do things like what you're doing with the Tick Booth Camp, and spreading the word, because it's not going to fly into people's ears or eyes. But yeah, so there I was. And then finally, so I got to see my functional medicine doctor up in Stockholm, and he was the first person who then who kind of went, oh, but you had a ring-shaped mark on your leg when you were 14. Could that have something to do with it? we'll do a Borrelia test as well. And but these tests up in Stockholm, they would take 5 weeks to get back. And by this time, I was connected to the cancer clinic that was I was talking about before, and I had I got to go back and speak to an actual doctor who'd been a specialist for quite some time. Finally, so this was in the middle of the summer, and I told him, and I knew him a little bit from working on a different ward. We'd worked together, so he kind of knew me as well, which made him give me maybe a little bit more time. And so I said, oh, this functional medicine guy in Stockholm, he thinks maybe that there's Borrelia, and he was like, oh, well, let's do a test as well. And I got it back in 2 days, and he called me back and he said, look, I need to put you on antibiotics. And that's the first time oh, okay. So what is this thing, Borrelia? I've never really.
So Åsa, I'm going to interrupt again because this is really powerful. You are a brilliant, smart woman who is a trained nurse who went through a master's program, who has a ton of connections in the field. And you were really sick at 39. You finally get diagnosed at 46. It took you approximately 7 years to get a diagnosis with your background and your connections and your intelligence, right? Mm. And not only that, once you get a proper diagnosis, you're like, what's Lyme disease? And that's not an indication of you. It just shows how flawed we are as a society to not have the awareness we need, because you are a brilliant woman, right? So I just want to highlight that this is something that you had a lot of things in your favor, and it still took you so long to get a diagnosis. Now you get the diagnosis and you're like, what's that mean? So, I'm sorry to interrupt, but walk us through when you got the diagnosis, you asked what's Lyme disease and what your next steps were.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd heard of it before as a colleague at work whose son had Lyme disease, and he really had weird symptoms, and that was kind of all you'd heard, was people seem to get really weird symptoms, but that's all I knew. So, but then I started kind of researching, and so I looked at the guidelines here in Sweden, which was 2 weeks of doxycycline, and then you're cured.
2 weeks of doxycycline.
Yeah.
Not happening with chronic Lyme disease. I'm sorry,
no,
just not happening.
I know. And then I looked at, because obviously I lived in London for a long time, so I looked at the guidelines there, and they said, oh, well, a month to 6 weeks seemed to be at the minimum. So I phoned up my doctor again, and I said, look, in England, that's what they're doing. Can I have a bit more? And he's a surgeon, so he was like, oh yeah, go on, have more then. And then after the second time when I phoned back and I said, oh, I've stopped taking the antibiotics, and as soon as I stop, I feel worse again. Can I have another course? And he went, oh, all right then. And then, but I'm going to have to refer you now to infections clinic, because this is obviously not cancer. So then, but it was also, this is happening in the middle of the summer of 2020. So it was during the worst of the pandemic, where we didn't have any vaccines or anything, so everyone's still panicking. And so he got me a referral, but he sent it kind of like a bit of a friend referral, because I was a nurse, and so I got to come and see a doctor in a closed down clinic in the middle of the summer, who just come back from the COVID ward, and she was all sweaty from the COVID patients and everything, and she basically thought that all this girl wants is a referral to skin clinic to see if because I'd started looking at articles and downloading things, and I'd found that what's it called, ACA.
That's when your skin is turning blue, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. I just can't remember exactly.
Acrodermatitis or something.
That's it.
I think, right?
Yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm. So I'd found an article. I found a couple of articles, and I wanted to show those. And so I'd also downloaded Richard Horowitz's The Symptoms That You Check, and I was basically
the MSIDS questionnaire.
The
correct?
MSIDS questionnaire, yeah. And I was going, this is me. This is all me. And I was
and
really.
This is post treatment, correct? This is after antibiotics.
It was during antibiotics that I was kind of looking at all these things, and I started kind of clicking, oh my God, this is so me, this is all my symptoms, and this explains everything. And I felt really, I found a solution. I know what to do now. And then
also, I'm going to interrupt again. I'm sorry, just for our listeners, because we have never talked about acrodermatitis, ACA, on this podcast.
All right.
I just want to, and you know better, obviously, but I believe that that's a skin condition, but it's caused by Lyme disease, but not what we here in the States know as Borrelia burgdorferi, or even Borrelia miyamotoi, which we talked about already on this podcast. I think it's the Borrelia avzeli. I'm probably saying it wrong. So it's another type of Lyme disease, right? So there's many different types. A specific type of Lyme disease causes a skin condition, which is an indication of a systemic Lyme infection, right? Is that what your thoughts were? I just want to make sure I understand what that is, so our listeners have a context to what ACA is.
No, that's perfect. Yes. So it's a strain of Borrelia which is very common in Europe, which I also, and I got this from the Richard Horowitz book, and I was going, oh, but that makes sense. And obviously I live in Europe, so that would make sense to me. And then my symptoms were my hand was turning blue, but because I'd already had the antibiotic treatment, by the time I got to see the doctor, my hand was actually back to normal. It wasn't blue anymore, but I had pictures of it when it was blue, but they weren't really that interested in those pictures. And obviously this meeting that I had with the doctor from infections clinic was very short, and she was rushed, and she didn't really have time to look at all the things that I'd researched and I'd brought with me. And after this, after this meeting, she said, oh, I'm going to do your referral, but now I've got to run. And I just felt so dejected. I felt, but but I have all this information that I want to share with you. And she was just not in a state where she could take this in at all. Which I understand in hindsight, but at the time it was really difficult because.
Also, I'm going to again interrupt. I think you're being too kind. I think you are way too nice and you're way too kind. And I want to highlight here that this doctor didn't do you justice, because it's an infectious disease specialist. And here in the States, infectious disease specialists don't do well with Lyme disease either. But that's their job. Lyme disease is an infectious disease, and they are they're their special doctor that's supposed to help you with Lyme disease. And they fail more times than not when dealing with chronic Lyme patients or persistent Lyme patients. And you were failed as well. So not only was this doctor, was she stressed and short on time, but she also told you that there's no such thing as persistent Lyme, and the treatment you received should have easily killed off the Borrelia in your body 3 times over and get out of here, basically, go to the skin doctor, right? So I think this doctor probably did more harm than good. So I just want to interject with my opinion and see what your thoughts are to my statements.
No, agreed 100%, because I did feel really dejected leaving there going, but I am an intelligent person. There's obviously science out there that's supporting this, and I looked at the website where there's a website you have in America, which I can't remember the name of now.
Is it ILATS?
Yes, which I looked at, and all those research articles that support Lyme, that persistent Lyme exists, and all those things, which I started to download, because obviously I have, as a research coordinator or research nurse, I have access to PubMed articles and things. So I had all this research with me that I wanted to share, and I wanted to have, what I've always wanted was somebody to spar with, because I can help myself. I don't need them to tell me what to do. And the only thing what they were doing was telling me all the wrong things to do. But anyway, so she referred.
I'm not a fan of this doctor. You're too kind, is what I'm going to say again. And we can move on. I know I'm going too much of this one, but I do want to add. So this whole ILATS component, we actually have a page on our website. If you go to tickbootcamp.com, there's a section called Chronic Lyme Proof on our website, and Lyme persists. There's over 700 peer-reviewed articles that were done in a scientific environment through universities that prove Lyme disease persists beyond the traditional antibiotic treatment. So again, over 700 peer-reviewed scientific articles that prove the persistence of Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses. So how do you question that? So when you have a doctor saying you're cured from a short course of doxycycline, and then there's this on the other side from peers in the scientific community, just blows my mind. And I'll leave it there again, and you can go on with your next steps. But this doctor just infuriates me Åsa, and you're being way too kind. So anyway,
Yeah,
please continue.
This was obviously my pattern of not having a voice, because I just felt that it wasn't my place. Well, I'll just listen to the good doctor. But anyway, in my body, this was growing. This frustration was obviously growing as well. So, but I was then referred to the skin clinic, and they did a biopsy on my arm, but they failed to look for Borrelia, even though I mentioned, can you please look for Borrelia? They didn't.
So they biopsied your skin. You asked for an analysis for Lyme disease, and they did not. They denied your request.
Or they missed it, or whatever. But it came back with what they couldn't kind of say that it wasn't Borrelia, but they couldn't also say that it was. So, but
this is with a positive test result. You already had a positive Lyme test, blood test.
Yeah. And also I brought the ACA article to show my skin doctor, and she kind of just glanced at it and went, yeah, it doesn't look like it. But that's because I'd already had the antibiotics, which made all the blue color go away. So, but yeah. And then, so they wanted me back for another biopsy. And I went through one of the most humiliating exams of my life, where they called me up, I think the day before or on the same day that this was happening, and said, can you come down to clinic? We've got a team of skin specialists from all over the world that come, and they want to do like a conference examination of you. So, okay. I had to tell my employer that I need to go. And luckily I work in the hospital, so it was quite close for me to go there. But so I went there. I had to sit undressed, my everything undressed on the top part of my body, in a cold room, and I was waiting. And then suddenly these 5 doctors would burst in. They wouldn't even really kind of say hello to you, and they would start prodding you and lifting your arm and pulling and looking. And then they would just talk to each other on top of you, and not even, some of them would ask you a question, and then they would just disappear. And then another team of 5 doctors would come in, and that happened 3 times. And I'm a nurse, and I'm just thinking, this is like cattle. I feel like an animal being prodded, and I almost cried, really. And it's quite emotional even telling the story now. And but the good thing that came out of that was that somebody, an Italian doctor, thought that it was a fasciitis, which is an inflammation of the fascia, which is the connective tissue in your body. But fascia is so much more than that. It's kind of everywhere in the body. And it's all the collagen in your body, and it's all the interstitial fluid as well. That's also part of fascia. And if that's inflamed, that's not good. But the treatment that they offered me then was steroids, and they wanted also to put me on a chemotherapy, which was called something or other, methotrexate. I don't know what it's called in English. And so I researched these 2 drugs, and basically it said, don't take these if you've got an infection. And I said, well, I'm not taking these 2 drugs because I have an infection. And they were just, oh, okay, well, if you don't want the treatment that we're offering, then we can't really offer you anything else. Okay, so where am I now then? Well, you're on your own, basically. But
it's really heartbreaking to hear that, also, because it's the experience of so many people in the Lyme community. You just feel so let down by the healthcare system, and it's the fact that it's happening across the globe, and you leave feeling like you're on your own, which is the absolute worst feeling when you're dealing with a chronic illness. So I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
But I'm really proud of myself for actually just saying no to these things as well, because I could have easily just gone, oh yeah, well, let's try this. But having read Richard Horowitz's book, and also, even though I didn't retain much of the information in it, it gave me the strength to actually say no. And also what I found from Richard Horowitz was something called drunk's disease, or
The auto brewery
syndrome.
Yes.
Auto brewery syndrome. Yeah, which is so much. I was really relieved when I found that, and I started also researching that. And so it's basically a Japanese or Chinese man or something who had cherries, and then he had a really high level of blood alcohol from eating cherries. And basically what they realized then was that the gut bacteria was breaking down the cherries and turning it into alcohol in his guts. And I was just like, well, that's what's happening to me. If I have sugar, I feel like I've had alcohol. So that's obviously something that's going on in my gut. And when I was telling my doctors this, they were just shaking their heads and going, she's crazy. But also, I think part of this, I know I'm wanting to be kind to the doctors, and I know you don't really want me to, but I think part of this was just not having the voice to speak up for myself and actually believing in myself enough to kind of go, well, hang on, you need to listen to me now. So that's grown with time. But
so after this whole failed thing with your skin and the biopsy, and then wanting to put you on chemotherapy and steroids, you're like, no way, I'm not doing that. And they said, all right, you're on your own. What happened next? Because you're still sick, right?
Yeah, they referred me back to infections clinic, and I did have another encounter with the first doctor, that the stressed one that I met, and she actually apologized. She said, look, I'm really, really sorry for our meeting last time. I understand that you didn't feel seen or heard, which is great. But she said, oh, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to refer you to Norrköping, which is our twin town here, where we have our Borrelia specialist. And this is a woman who's written, she's written some research articles on Borrelia, and she's our local specialist. So I was referred to her, and I got to see her. And this is then about the beginning of 2021, I guess. I got to see her, and by then I'd listened to quite a few of the Tick Boot Camp podcasts, and I was feeling a little bit stronger in myself, and just hearing so many other people going through the same thing of not being believed and not being seen and heard. It made me stronger, even though in my body I was incredibly weak. But this woman that I saw, she was, and I also knew her from my work, so she knew me as somebody who was competent and could give her advice about how to run a research study and everything like that. So we were more like, she didn't look at me solely as a patient and solely as somebody who's a bit crazy. So I think she could hear me on a different level. But still she maintained that the Borrelia could not be a problem, because I'd had such a high dose of antibiotics that it just couldn't be. And she maintained that. And by then I'd also listened to the episode that you had on intestinal worms. And it was the Californian woman who's brilliant, Kristananos, I think her name is, and that's made me think, ooh, but maybe that's what's happening. Maybe I've got some, because I think now in hindsight, what happened when I had the antibiotics in the summer of 2020, it knocked out all my good flora as well, and it gave the parasites and the intestinal worms a free run. So by the time Christmas came around, I was really, really sick. But at the time also, I ordered the Unlocking Lyme book, which I thought was so much more accessible. And also because of Richard Horowitz's, his treatments were so far away from Sweden and so far away from anything that I could even look at. I think the Dr. Rawls book was so much more accessible. And I was thinking, hey, this is something I can do. And what really resonated with me was the pot boiling over thing, where it's not just the Borrelia, it's everything in my life that's adding to the stress. And then I also read another really amazing book called Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle by, it's up there somewhere.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. I can't remember the author, but also I just want to acknowledge you for being like, you're so intelligent and resourceful, and nothing was being given to you for help in your country, and you so bravely continued to search until you found resources. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've been questioned so many times, and it's really tough. And also being questioned, I was being questioned by everyone. My whole family were against me, even from when I started kind of doing the thing with sugar, they turned against me because I was probably really quite horrible to them as well. And I own that very much because I was desperate, and I just didn't know what was, I didn't know what was going on in my body, and I was trying to heal myself, and I was really angry with everyone, and nobody was listening. I felt that nobody was listening to me. So I was fighting my own body. I was fighting my family, and I was fighting the healthcare system. I was fighting everyone, and it was a tough time.
Did they recognize, like, when you told, were you still with your husband when you found out you had Lyme, when you got a diagnosis, and how did he react to that? And your kids, like, did they believe in it? Did they believe you that could be causing these problems?
In some ways, I think they did, but then because I'd been so confused for so long about so many things, I think they just didn't really. I think they just thought, oh, it's another thing that she's looking at now. And also it's difficult when the healthcare system was saying, no, it's all in your head. It's difficult. It was difficult, and I don't know, I can't really speak for them, but I think getting some kind of diagnosis was obviously a big relief. But then when you start reading about Lyme disease, and there's so many different ways of treating it, and what is the right way, and I was really panicking back then. And when I asked my husband, can you please help me to understand this, he didn't want to, or he didn't feel like he could. I'm not sure. And I understand that now, because I was very aggressive, but I was sick and I was desperate. But also, I think mainly the Tick Boot Camp, and also this other pod, the Better Health Guy pod, were kind of fueling me and helping me to start believing in myself, and actually starting to believe that I knew better. I didn't need to follow these people's advice, because there are doctors out there who actually have had Lyme themselves and have cured themselves. This is possible, and that I would never have known about Dr. Rawls if it hadn't been for Tick Boot Camp. So I'm so grateful, and also Dr. Horowitz and all these people that are helping so many people, that they really buoyed me and helped me and gave me the strength to carry on. So and to believe in myself.
I'm sorry to interrupt. What other treatments did you end up trying? You mentioned the fascia, and then I think you mentioned herbs maybe in your questionnaire.
Yeah,
but what other treatments?
Actually, the first thing, when I got the Dr. Rawls book, Unlocking Lyme, I also started reading the Healing Lyme book by, you probably know quickly.
There's so many.
Yeah. What's his name? I can't find it there. Anyway.
I'm sorry, might have been
Buhner.
Yeah.
I think Rachel, right? Stephen Buhner.
That's right. Yeah. I started reading that one as well, and it all resonated with me, and I understand my symptoms, like connected to what they were saying, and it made sense to me, which made which made it all clearer. But obviously, you know, Matt, or you probably know as well, Rachel, when you haven't got your brain fully there and you can't retain what you're reading, it just makes it so much more difficult. And that's where I realized that if you just have somebody else who can advocate for you as well and help you to believe in you and understand, then it's much, much easier. But obviously, I was in that state where I was just going, it's just me against the world. And I'm just going to have to do this on my own. So that's probably why it took a lot longer. And I think in one episode, which made me laugh a little bit, I think Richard asked the question, do you think you would have healed quicker if you'd been a little bit more coachable? And that really resonated with me, because I was totally going my own way, even with lots of other doctors that were actually genuinely trying to help me. I felt that I couldn't really trust them, and I was doing a lot of things that probably didn't help me at the time, but never mind. It was a journey I had to take. But so we are now at 2021, and I had the meeting with this second opinion doctor, and she didn't kind of believe that any of the things that I was talking about were true when it comes to Lyme, but she did see that I was really sick, and because I'd lost a lot of weight. So at the time I was down to about 50 kilos, and my normal weight was always, since I was about 18, 19, it's always 62. So I was really skinny and I had no energy whatsoever, and she saw that. So she gave me sick note for a month for exhaustion, basically. So I was released from work for a month, which gave me a chance to kind of catch up and to get all my books. And what I did for the first of this week, I booked into a hotel in the middle of nowhere, and I brought my books and my yoga mat and everything, and I just researched and read, and then I took a walk down to the water, and I laid on a jetty. This was March, it was freezing cold, so I had all my clothes on, and I was just lying there and trying to listen to my body and trying to listen what my body was telling me. And I was reading also another brilliant book, which is a woman who cured herself from MS, the Walls Protocol. That book I was reading as well, and it was all these doctors who were basically curing themselves from supposedly incurable diseases with the help of nutrition and stress relieving and all these things. And it just so resonated with me. And so I started like clawing my own way back to life by all these books that were helping me, and the herbals. I started a course of herbals, the Dr. Rawls Vital Plan. I ordered one load, and I tried it in November of 2020. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, I actually started to feel a difference. And this was a real leap of faith for me, because I'm a nurse, and it's, you know, everything should be proven scientifically. But the Dr. Rawls book, he explained it so well, and there is the science, and there is science, so it wasn't like a blind leap of faith, but even so, going from never taking tablets at all to taking 4 in the morning and or whatever, it was 12 tablets in the morning and 12 tablets in the evening. It was a big thing, but I started feeling better, so I was thinking, God, something's happening here. But then they ran out, and they were horribly expensive, and obviously we have to pay the tax and the all that thing. So I thought I've got to find something equivalent here in Sweden. So I found a naturopath, and I went to see her, and she prescribed me pretty much the herbs that I then much later ended up taking, and I started taking them just before Christmas, and I got horribly ill, much worse. And I was thinking, oh, but it must be because it's alcohol in this. And I had all these, because basically she muscle tested me, and she put crystals all over my body, and then she prescribed these herbs, and I was going, this is crazy. This can't be true. I just couldn't believe in it, because I was a nurse and I was trained in the classical. It just didn't make sense to me. And I don't think she explained it, that it would get worse before it got better. I didn't get that.
And
even yeah. And even if she did say that, I just didn't hear it. So I started taking them, and then I stopped. So around New Year's, I was really, really, really sick. And obviously I'd eaten things around Christmas that I wasn't supposed to, and I was blaming that mainly. But on New Year's Day, I couldn't get out of bed. I was so dizzy, and my whole body was burning. My hands, both my arms. I can only explain it as I felt as somebody was washing the inside of my body with what do you call it? Disinfectant. And it was just burning. Everything was burning, and I just felt so ill. And so I thought, right, I've got to do something. So I started. Then I got an Excel sheet out, and I started writing down everything I ate, everything I put in my body. And I ordered 3 months worth of Dr. Rawls's herbs. And I started thinking, like, now I'm taking charge of this. And then so that's where it started. I'm jumping back and forth a bit, so the timeline here is a bit out. But then I got my sick note in March, where I could kind of really go into the research, and I was taking all the herbs, and and that was the turning point. And then I started to slowly claw my way back into life again.
So also the 3 months of the Restore Kit, I think you also ordered the Gut Revival Kit. You told us offline,
That's right?
So you were using Dr. Rawls's Restore Kit for chronic Lyme and rebuilding of your system, and the Gut Revival Kit, which is critical, especially after antibiotics, to restore your gut health, which we know is very connected to your immune health. So I think you did that for 3 months, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Or 4 maybe, because I started with quite a low dose. Yeah.
And that rebounded you back pretty well. And that was the beginning, you feel, of your climb back to health. And
during my sick leave as well, I found about Dr. J. Davidson, and I had a consult with them. You can call them up and have a free consult to see if they can work with you. But obviously for me, it was very difficult, because I'm so far away, so it would have had to be conference calls, and there was no way I could spend $100,000. Just not in my world. So, but what they did was just they said order the foundation protocol and try that. So when the Dr. Rawls herbs finished, then I went over to the Dr. J. Davidson's foundational protocol, which has also got I think it's called digestive mover or something that you start with, because I had so much constipation. And that was a really big thing. Now I understand, because now I can connect it straight away. Oh, I'm a bit constipated. That's why my brain's not working. But back then I just didn't know.
Also, were these Cellcore products that you were now working with? Is that what they were?
Yeah, not the Cellcore. It's called
microbe formulas.
Yeah, microformulas. Yeah, because we don't have Cellcore doctors here, as far as I know. We might have now, but I looked around, and there was you either had to work with somebody in America or just ordered the online stuff that you could get. And again, this was a huge investment for me, because obviously I don't have that amount money really, and it's all out of pocket, but I could start to feel a shift in my health, and then I reasoned that if you don't have your health, what do you have, and what are you going to do with money if you don't have your health? So this is beginning of 21, and this is still during the Corona pandemic. And then what happened was the whole vaccine thing was rolled out. And so my dad, who who's been a rock for us with helping. He was a carpenter, and he was helping us with all the renovation of our house and everything. But he wasn't old, but he was starting to get really tired, and he was going, oh, this is going to be my last project. And then we'd do another project and he would go, this is definitely going to be my last project. But he had the first vaccine, and he had really horrible digestive symptoms after. So everything would just go straight through him. And so he had the opposite of me. And then around May, I think, of 2021, he had the second jab. And after that, he just didn't recover. And I was seeing his symptoms and comparing them a little bit to mine. They weren't the same, but very similar in some ways. And he got really ill. And then he was going in and out of hospital and getting worse and worse. And this was obviously a really stressful time for me as well. But just seeing his journey woke me up a little bit as well to what was going on in my own body. So I made the conscious choice of not having the jab. And I think obviously some Lyme patients can have it and some can't. And I don't know what it was that triggered my dad's illness, but it was definitely something in the jab that set something else off in his body.
Also, real quick about that. So we hinted at your house construction, right? And now this has been going on for quite a while. Do you think that while your dad was helping with your construction at your home and you're living in his home, that possibly you're being exposed to mold and toxins and heavy metals, and that was having an impact on your health, causing you to get, worse and then feel a little better, and your body was constantly fighting it off, and maybe it was impacting your father's health as well, because we know older homes, remodeling, there's going to be mold, there's going to be toxins, there's going to be things that are not good for the human body to breathe in or come into contact with. Have you thought about that looking back?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I know that when we did our bathroom, we found a really big black mold part where there had been a leak from the ceiling, and we also had very similar symptoms that our eyes and noses would run, and I think that's definitely connected to mold. And also my dad never had this, but I had this smell of smoke. So I would go, is somebody smoking here? Is somebody smoking it? And it would only be me who smelled it. So, and then when I was in the Lyme community, I posted this on one of the Lyme, and I got lots and lots of replies going, yes, I get that as well. And I was like, phew, it's not just me. So I think now I connect that to mold, because also where I work at the moment, there's been an issue with mold, and the people who worked there previously were moved out because lots of people got sick, and they did a renovation, and they did sanitation for mold, and but then there was another water leak, and there's lots of people at my work who have very weird symptoms. Nobody's connected it to mold apart from me, and I've told my employers, and I said they're going to look into it, but nothing's really happened yet. But I've now elected to work from home as much as possible, but I don't know, this might be mold here as well. So but I feel much better if I work from home anyway, because as soon as I turn up at my work, I get the smell of smoke in my nose, and I know. But yeah, we digress. But yes, I think that's definitely what happened. In my dad's case, they found asbestos in his lungs, because he's been working with that in the 50s and 60s. So they attributed his quick demise to the asbestos, even though it was in his lungs, and on all the scans it was encapsulated and probably didn't actually give him that much grief. But that's what they said was his course of death anyway, because he got lung cancer. But he died really, really, really quickly. So he was fairly healthy in May before he had the jabs, and he was dead in September. So was a big shock, and it happened so quickly, and also it was very, very difficult for me as a nurse to witness how he was treated in the hospital. And it was a difficult time, because I was really more of his nurse than his daughter at the time when we were in hospital.
How did this affect you personally, that your father getting sick from the vaccine, then getting lung cancer and passing so quickly? I mean, that emotional stress we know plays a huge role in your immune health, and obviously, it correlates to your physical health with Lyme disease. So how are you managing everything going on and your father's passing with your own health at this time at the end of 2021?
It was tough. It was really, really tough. But also, I think I was healing at the time, and I was doing the right things. But obviously I really, because what I did was I signed up for a grief group at the church, which it was and going through all these stages of my dad's death, I realized a year later just how traumatic it was for me, and just how difficult it was at the time. And it was also during that time that me and my husband decided that we were going to separate, and we were telling the kids that we weren't going to be together anymore. And all of this was happening at the same time. And also my husband is a comedian. And the week that my dad died, he was putting on this massive comedy festival in our town. So it was just, everything was happening at the same time, and he was going, so he obviously loved my dad very dearly as well, and it was a tough time for my husband as well, to be putting on a comedy festival at the same time as his dad-in-law is lying in hospital dying. So it was stressful, really, really stressful. But also I felt that I was in a space of healing, and also I'd read up on vitamin C, for example, and how that could help. And I was asking the doctors, can we just stop the antibiotics and give him vitamin C instead? Because I think this is viral. The antibiotics they're not going to help him. And he needs nourishment, and because he wasn't drinking anything as well, he was so, like, his fascia was swelling up everywhere. And in hindsight, now that I know so much more, I feel that if I could have just taken him out of hospital and treated him myself, he might have still lived. But I can't keep beating myself up about this. So I've just had to kind of let that go. And also my dad said to me, because we did, from him getting his so-called death sentence, we had about a month, and we talked a little bit, even though he was losing his mind quite a bit. Then he was still saying that, I'm 74, I've had a good life, it's okay. And I was with him when he died, and I was sitting there going, Dad, it's okay, I'll be all right, because I'm his only child. And I was going, you can go now, it's okay. So he had a very nice death, if that's possible, and we reconciled. And also I can honestly leave that part of my life and still feel that, even though it was a horrible experience, and it made me richer. And obviously I wish that my dad was still here, and I wish I could speak to him and whatever, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you think that immense grief, as Matt was saying, do you think that affected your symptoms, or were you pretty steady up until where you are now?
I think it obviously, any stress that you go through obviously aggravates all your symptoms. But I was doing all the things that I needed to do to get better. Or maybe not all the things, because I still relapsed a lot in eating things that I shouldn't. And also that's my pattern, is I get stressed and then I eat. So, and obviously I was still doing that during this time. but also I'd learned to forgive myself and just move on rather than beat myself up about it. So I was slowly still moving in the right direction.
I think self-forgiveness is a huge part of healing too. That's a roadblock for a lot of people in so many ways, shapes, and forms. But so where would you say you are today, and what do you think were the biggest contributors to your health now?
Well, I'm a very different person now to who I was before I got ill. I'm much calmer. I know when I need to slow down and rest, and I'm much more forgiving over myself, and I'm much more forgiving to everyone else around me as well. So I feel that I've gained so much from this illness, and I think the biggest change in my life was going for my first fascia treatment. So a friend of mine who I'd met through one of these sugar addiction courses had been to something called a fascia treatment, or and it's a fascia balance machine that shakes up your fascia and releases toxins from your tissues. And I'd read about it, and they've also got really good podcasts. This is all in Swedish, unfortunately, but it's very good. And I started listening to that. And my friend was saying that she walked out of this treatment and she felt like she was walking on air. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I started listening to the podcast, and it all resonated so much with me because they were going back to how we ended up in this mess where we just see the mind and the body as two different things. And the psychic and the somatic is two different things, and how we have to start putting everything together. So the fascia is only been an organ recognized as an organ of the body since I think 2014, or it was discovered I think in 14, not discovered, but kind of more realized as a something of value in 14, and I think in 2017 it was recognized as an organ of itself, and it's the body's largest organ. And understanding the fascia means that you have to put everything back together as a whole. So the whole body, everything's connected. So your toe is connected to your brain. Everything is connected. And once you realize that and you start looking at the body in that way, everything shifts. So I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to work with this. So I thought, I've got to see the man who created this machine. So I booked with him, and I thought, oh, I'll never get an appointment. But I went on the internet, and they said, oh, there's an appointment next week and I can go. Oh, this is meant to be. So I went, and when I came out of that treatment, I was so tired. And I went back to a flat in Stockholm where I stayed, and I just lie down on the bed, and my stomach was literally in uproars. And I've got pictures of this or a video of this where you can see my body, my stomach, my abdomen's just moving violently. And that's kind of when I realized I had these intestinal worms as well. And so I started looking into that, and then I went back because this fascia treatment was also available in my hometown from a woman here. So I booked for a second treatment, and walking out of the second treatment, because I'd lost all this weight, I was just skin and bones, and I'd lost my breasts, so they were just little flaps. And walking out of my second treatment, I could physically feel these, my breasts filling up as if I was breastfeeding. Because what the fascia treatment does, it just kicks your bodily fluids. They get them going again. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So it increases the flow in the lymph system, and it basically, if you have stagnation in your tissues, which you do when you have inflammation, it kicks it it moves it around.
That makes so much sense. It's like moving all the toxins and stagnant things in your body and just like bringing you back to life. So is that something you're doing now regularly?
Yeah. So basically after this, these 2 treatments, I thought, this is just amazing. I need to know more. And around the time then I was looking into doing the course, and it was really expensive. And I thought, oh, I can't afford this, but I really want to do it. And then because of my dad passing, I inherited some money. And then so I thought, yeah, I'm gonna buy one of these machines, and I'm gonna learn how to do this. And so I got the machine, and I started treating myself almost daily with this. Like I would treat my arm and my hand, and starting slowly to feel the tissues kind of warming up again and releasing all these toxins. But also you have to be a bit careful because of the herxing and everything. You if you overtreat, then it's not great. But yeah, slowly I'm clawing my way back to health. But
like
the biggest,
this was a big part of your transformation, this fascia discovery.
Yeah, no, that was, and also the vitamins, like vitamin C. So if I overtreat, I know it, then I can go back and take really, really high doses of vitamin C, and then that will take care of the toxins that I'm releasing. So it's a very delicate dance, and also looking at the body as an ecosystem. I don't believe that we're ever going to be able to get rid of all these things in our body that we've amassed through our life, that they're always going to be there. But what we're going to have to do is just treat ourselves with kindness and respect, and give the body the nourishment that it needs, and also move so that we have a movement in the fascia. And when you can't move, when you're too sick to move, then this machine is very, very good, because it helps you. And also the saunas and the hot baths and everything that increases your pulse, and it helps you rid the toxins from your body. And just
that's I'm sorry to interrupt. It sounds like that's been such a huge part of your journey and your learnings is the self-respect and the self-love and listening to your own intuition, and it sounds like now you're being called to help others with this. Is that right?
Yeah, it's so amazing. And it's really that what we were talking about before the podcast, about giving back to the community, and you basically help yourself by helping others. And that's such a nice realization that I've had in the last couple of years, is that through giving to others, you give to yourself. And that and I've actually managed now to heal my relationship with my daughter, or at least we're on our way to. And also possibly with my husband, even though we're still separated, but we're much better friends now than we were before. And we respect each other, and we give each other the freedom to do what we want. So all of these things, and looking at your whole life as an ecosystem, and finding the balance, and yoga has helped me so much with that, finding balance, because when you balance, suddenly you learn to balance on your arms. I never thought possibly that my body could do these things, and it's a realization that if I can do this, I can do anything.
I think the body truly wants to heal, and you clearly have overcome some very, very difficult obstacles and found your way here. And I can assure you this podcast is going to help so many people, and I am sure that you doing the fascia treatments is going to help so many as well. And so we have a final question for you. If you could do one thing differently during your journey, what would it be?
That's a good question. I don't know if I would do anything different. because everything that I've done so far has led me to where I am now. So all the steps that I took, I think I needed to take them to get here. But yes, obviously it would have been great if I'd been able to speak up for myself earlier. I think the journey would have been shorter. But then if I had, maybe I hadn't learned all those things that I needed to learn. So I don't think looking at the past and wishing it was different is helpful. So I think rather looking at the future and looking what will I do next is more, it's more serving of actually going forward, if that makes sense.
It does.
So
That's beautiful. I think so many of our listeners need to hear that, because so many people are kicking themselves for not doing something or wanting things to be done faster. And if you can trust the journey that you're on and believe that this is all happening to you and for a reason.
Yeah, I have one more little story I'd like to tell, which is I just I found something untoward in my vagina, and I decided that, because I was working obviously in the gynae ward, so I had to go and see my old colleagues and have this examined, and it's not great. You don't want to be doing that, but I did. And they found something that they wanted to do a biopsy on, and also at the time they also found a polyp in my uterus that they wanted to remove. And I said, but I think this is caused by the worms that I have in my stomach that nobody wants to accept that they're there. I've had multiple stool tests that have all come back negative. I've even handed in a live worm to my GP's office, and that still came back negative. But I was thinking, I knew this is what's my problem. So there was a colleague that I highly respect. She's a very, very good surgeon, and she's a very good gynecologist. And she was saying, you've got this polyp, it's not going to go away by itself, we need to remove it. And I said, okay, well, give me some time. I don't want to do it straight away, because I want to treat the inflammation in my body first. So they sent me a call to be operated on. And I found this in around Easter 2021. Sorry, no, it was this year, so 2022. And then they called me for an operation in the middle of the summer, and I was like, no, I'm not ready. And I phoned up and cancelled, and I said, look, I want a bit more time, because I think I can sort this out myself. But obviously I want it checked, because I'm not against healthcare. So, and they said, okay, fine, we'll call you in the autumn. And so I was called to this operation last Tuesday, and I said, oh, I don't really want to have an operation. I want you to look at what's there first. And it's like, but it's not going to be gone. Okay. Okay, well, I'll come for the operation, and then you can look before the operation. So I had this discussion with my doctor, and then so they rolled me into the operations, and they said, oh, but where are these things that you want us to take a biopsy on? Well, they're not there anymore. And then they did a scan on the uterus, and they found that the polyp that was there had decreased. It wasn't gone, but it had decreased in size. And they said to me that this would never go away by itself. And so I felt, oh, this is such a nice confirmation on the fact that what I'm doing with my body is the right thing. And they have obviously totally denied that it had anything to do with the herbs. And they said, oh, but there's no evidence for this. And I said, there's plenty of evidence if you just know where to look, but nobody wants to look at it because there's no money in it. And that's the sad truth. But I just wanted to share that story as well, because
amazing.
Yeah.
Also, we just have to say, Rachel and I clearly see the progress in you. I mean, reading your questionnaire, speaking to you about your experience, I mean, the transformation you've had has been radical, and it's amazing to see you here today, so healthy and so well, sharing everything you've done with our community to help everybody listening to this podcast. So thank you also so much for coming in and joining the Tick Bootcamp podcast from Sweden to, our international audience, to bring all the great things you brought to this podcast. And I also want to give a special thank you to Rachel Barnes. Rachel, you were awesome, and we were so happy to have you back as a co-host, and we were certainly going to be inviting you back again for some future collaborations as well, Rachel. So also, Rachel, thank you so much, and this has been a great, great interview.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you for listening to our Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Åsa Rydmark Kersley. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First of all, if you'd like to learn more about Åsa, please check out her Instagram at AWESOMASOR. Second, if you've enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends on social media. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com/bite to review the blueprint. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on your podcast platform of choice. And finally, if you'd like to search our podcast library of over 250 episodes, subscribe to our email list, or share feedback, please visit our website at tickbootcamp.com. And as always, thank you for listening.